أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغرر الميامين، سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا، مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة، الحجة بن الحسن العسكري، فداه أرواح العالمين. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة، وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. اللهم وهب لنا رأفته ورحمته وعونه ودعاءه وخيره ورضاه، ما ننال به سعة من رحمتك وفوزا عندك يا كريم، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be in your midst on this lovely, albeit very cold evening. We did have to walk for quite a bit from the car park, and I kind of regretted it halfway through, but it's wonderful to be spending some time with you to try and discuss, I guess, pertinent issues, problems, and questions that you might have, and simultaneously talk about perhaps the bigger picture. Because while personal challenges are important to address, the bigger picture sometimes gets lost in the midst of the chaos, the mayhem, the confusion, as well as the more focused personal kind of problems. And you probably know that the US president, there's been a tradition where he will address the people in the United States on an annual basis. He gets invited to the US House of Representatives, and in the presence of both chambers, both the Congress as well as the Senate, and they call that the State of the Union. The idea is that the president is expected to talk about literally the state of the nation, its economic challenges, its political issues, external, internal struggles. And I think every once in a while we need a State of the Union, a state of the nation. Where are we at this juncture in time as a nation that subscribes to the final message and adheres, or at least claims to adhere, to the teachings of the Holy Prophet of Islam, and of course, more specifically, our nation, the followers of the Ahlul Bayt. We are, after all, not a denomination, but a full-fledged nation at this point. We're talking about over 300 million people, according to my own estimates, around 500 million people worldwide. Where are we? Where are we headed? What are the strengths, weaknesses, threats, and the challenges that we have going forward? Do we have a roadmap for the future? Sadly, the answer to that question is a resounding no. And there appears to be no clear idea of where we wish to be in 25 years' time, in 50 years' time? And if you then look at the nation as a whole lacking any clear vision for the future, it follows from that as smaller communities, whether it be those living in one particular city in the north of England, or even as a student union, there seems to be a lack of any kind of vision for the future. It's relatively haphazard. It's kind of us trying to tackle each problem as it comes. There's hardly any planning. And it's kind of understandable because people go to university expecting to study for 3 years or 4 years. And so how much can you really plan for the future? You're usually mired in your own bubble of trying to make the most out of the 3-4 years that you spend at university. And so how are you going to plan for people who enroll after you've graduated? And so we kind of just keep delegating this task to other people. Whereas if someone sat down and seriously thought about the idea that there are going to be people who follow the Ahlul Bayt school and who await the Imam of the time at this university, just like there are now, then we need to put in place some form, some measure of a plan, a roadmap, a vision, call it what you want, for the students that are studying here now and those who will come in the future, to be able to capitalize on the achievements that we've made. And the achievements need to be much greater than us being able to secure some kind of recognition by the university, or some room where we get to pray, or a corner where we can leave our turba without having someone come and vandalize it, right? It has to be bigger than that. It has to be something that's more meaningful and more long-lasting. For instance, I usually tell my friends who come from overseas, and I can see there are some faces here in the audience of people who have come from either the eastern province in Hijaz or Bahrain or Kuwait or what have you, that you're going to be in this country for 4 years or 5 years, or let's say even 10, 12 years. You need to leave some kind of legacy. You need to be able to go back home once you've graduated and say to yourself that I left some fingerprints, some semblance of presence that serves the Imam of the time in the country that I went to. Because that's how it was previously. In the old days, merchants by definition and by trade don't spend years and years in any particular place. But they would go to those countries and they would ensure that they leave a legacy that would translate with time to entire nations embracing Islam. And that's how Islam reached places as far-flung as Indonesia and Malaysia and whatnot. It wasn't scholars who did this, it was merchants. And this reminds me of a hadith where somebody comes to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam and he says to him, Yabna Rasulullah, I go to the land of kuffar and my friends, they mock me for that. And they mock me for a very good reason, my words, not his. He says that they keep telling me, what if you die over there? And I remember when I used to travel, 20 years ago or so, I always felt kind of depressed that if I end up dying in this part of the world, what's going to happen to me? Where am I going to be buried? Will anyone visit my grave? Those sorts of quarter-life crisis issues. And so he says to the Imam that my friends mock me and they say, what if you die over there? What's going to happen to you? So the Imam asked them a very important question, which we should all be thinking about. The Imam says to him, when you're there, do you promote our teachings or not? Is this part of your toolkit? Is this something you care about? Or is it just money and business? Do you promote our teachings? Do you propagate our way of life? And he said to the Imam, yes, I do. It's just part of what it meant to be a Shia of the Ahlul Bayt at some point in time. Maybe not so much right now, but previously it was like, yeah, I'm a Shia. Kunu lana zaynan. The Imam kept telling his companions, وَلَا تَكُونُوا عَلَيْنَا شَيْنًا. Be means of beautification for us. Make the school of the Ahlul Bayt look as appealing as it actually is. And do not be a means of disgrace for us. So he said to the Imam, yes, I do. When I'm there, I have this urge to, be on my toes and be the best version of myself and just promote with action, not through debates and polemical discussions and things like that, which unfortunately have become the currency with which we promote our faith or claim to do so anyway nowadays, right? The Imams never asked anyone to engage in debates. It was only a very select few people that the Imam would delegate this task to, the likes of Hisham ibn al-Hakam. The Imam, in fact, would tell some of his companions, you're not cut out for this. Don't do this, because you might do a disservice to our faith. And so now it's just become, something that anybody who's able to read 3 books and write a blog, it's like, yeah, bring it on. I'm going to be debating people and whatnot. The Imams never asked us for debates. That's not how you invite people to the faith. If anything, you push them away. Instead, the Imams have asked us to invite people to their cause through action, by being good, righteous followers of the Ahlul Bayt, devout with every fiber of our being. Which is a lot harder if you think about it, right? For me to do like a half-hour debate, hour-long debate is easy, right? Just take a few things from their books and a few things from ours and you kind of challenge them. But to live a life of virtue and righteousness and in the process invite people, that takes, it takes commitment, and someone who's kind of hypocritical in terms of their fellowship with the Ahlul Bayt is just not going to be able to do it. So he said to the Imam that I do invite people to your cause in the manner that you've prescribed. So the Imam said to him, if you end up dying in those lands, يَحْشُرُكَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. And this is a reference to Ibrahim alayhi salam, where the Quran says that Ibrahim was a single nation in his own right. So the Imam says to him that if you die there, God forbid, then you will be raised as a single nation. Meaning you will receive all the privileges of being a Muslim who died in isolation, but while inviting people to the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as he lived his life. So, all of that aside, and I think we've ran over the 10-minute mark that I had, yes. Oh, that's it, okay. But I will say a couple of more points which I think are important. Number one, it may seem like we are going through a very difficult time, and we might have questions about this later on, but I just want to address a few points. It may seem like this juncture of time, the followers of the Ahlul Bayt are facing a very cold, dark winter that's coming ahead. And in many ways, that's very true. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of fear, and we're vulnerable. At the same time, I think it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that there are lots of opportunities that are presenting themselves as well. The first thing I will say is if you disregard the current challenges, which have always existed in one shape or another, and if you take a bird's eye view of the nation, the state of the nation, you'll find that we are experiencing a renaissance. And I don't say that lightly. We are in a very good position, historically speaking, because a lot of things are falling into place. And if you look at the community here in the West, what you find is a situation where we're probably stronger than ever. and we're more equipped to deal with our challenges than ever. The elders are recognizing the need for youth-oriented initiatives. Only 10 years ago, maybe even 5 or 3 years ago, a lot of centers were not accommodating for English programs, for instance. Even though that comes with its own sets of challenges, but I just want to speak very broadly. The youth are also in a better position today than they were, let's say, 20, 22 years ago when I first started out giving lectures in English, which was a very new phenomenon. The youth seem to be a lot more mature. They are less prone to factional infighting, am I right? So we didn't inherit our parents' tensions and problems back home. With Iraq, this is especially true, where there was a lot of factional tensions and you had like different parties vying for power and whatnot. Now the youth, they just don't care anymore. They're like, who cares? I'm going to go to any center that offers me a good, solid program that's beneficial, irrespective of who runs the center and whatnot. So we're seeing all of these happening, and the renaissance, I think, is taking shape. Now, for that to happen in a meaningful and effective way, we need a new mindset. And we need that vision. We need that roadmap. We need people to think outside the box, or as I often say, we need to think outside the mosque. We need to start figuring out where we want to be, not just where are we at the present moment. I say to community leaders and people who are presidents of committees and boards at different mosques that you need to start thinking a lot more about building a school for the youth, about figuring out how to fill the massive vacuum of qualified English-speaking indigenous local scholars than you do talking about parking spaces for the mosque. I'm not saying those aren't challenges, but you need to start thinking a lot bigger than the problems that you face on a day-to-day basis. And I think that paradigm shift, that change in the mindset, which allows us to move beyond the archaic institutions that we presently have and that were built a few generations ago, for that to happen, the change has to be sparked on university campuses, right? This is where the thinking has to take place. This is where the vision has to take shape. And this is where the plan for the future has to begin to crystallize. It'll materialize when you've graduated, when you're more established, when you become active members of your local communities. But the crystallization of the ideas has to happen right here, right now, in this room, and those similar to it. And so my hope is that we start thinking about those bigger issues and we start to search for solutions, and that it happens with the dedication, sincerity, faith, conviction, and sheer enthusiasm that comes with being a youth, which is who you are. Thank you so much. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And it's all over to you.
We'll begin with some questions. We'll have a QR code up as well, so that we can, you guys can scan the QR code to get some questions up. So, Said, I wanted to start off by asking you about your journey as how you started as a scholar, and how perhaps you could give us some advice as youth, because obviously we have, inshallah, a lot of time to learn about Islam and to become knowledgeable in different aspects. So how would you advise all of us to implement some of those, implement some knowledge?
So my own journey, well, I grew up wanting to be a believe it or not, a nuclear physicist. It's kind of random, I know. I was always obsessed with the field. I read every article I could get my hands on, every book that I could find. And it was always just a passion of mine. Nuclear physics. My nickname in high school was Einstein. And it was nice because everyone just always plagiarized off of me. They would cheat from my classes. I'm not bragging or anything. I'm just saying that in that area, don't ask me about athletics and sports. That was my thing. I was the nerd. But then there was a shift in thinking when somebody sat down with me and I had a long chat about my future and what I wanted to do and so on. And I realized that for two reasons, I need to take this path. The first one is that we have a living Imam. That's the difference between us and literally every other nation. And that Imam has expectations. Just like Imam al-Hussein had expectations, not for his sake, but for the sake of the community of believers to grow and flourish. The Imam has expectations. Imam al-Hussein's expectation was for his people and his flock and his companions to be loyal to him, right? And that's a consistent theme. If you look at the lives of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, from the Prophet all the way down to the 12th Imam, there was a lack of loyalty, a lack of commitment, right? Amir al-Mu'mineen, I'm sure you've heard, at some point, his own cousin, Ubaydullah ibn al-Abbas, abandoned the Imam along with 6,000 troops. This is when the Imam was headed to the Battle of Siffin. 6,000 of them disappeared overnight because his own cousin, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, decided to abandon him. And this was after Muawiyah had killed 2 of his sons. Imagine the treachery. Imagine the lack of commitment towards God and your ideals and values. Your own 2 children were killed by this monster, and yet in exchange for a handsome amount of money, you know how they say everybody has a price tag? May we never be put in a position where we meet our price tag, right? Inshallah, we won't have a price tag. But the reality is that if I was offered $1 billion, I would probably start to shake. And that was a problem that the Ahlul Bayt faced all along. And it was the ultimate test, that of loyalty. Amir al-Mu'mineen, you've heard that Rasulullah instructed him that he shouldn't fight, he should refrain from resisting, and he should face all of the unspeakable challenges and atrocities that were committed against him and his family, unless he had 40 or more supporters. 40 is all it took to literally change the course of history to this day. And yet there weren't 40 people to step up. What a shame. What a disgrace. That's Amir al-Mu'mineen. Then Imam al-Hasan, and don't even get me started on the treachery and treason that Imam al-Hasan had to face and grapple with. Then Imam al-Hussein, and again 30,000 versus 100 or so. So I kind of wrestled with the idea that Imam al-Zaman needs loyal supporters. Now, of course, you can argue that you can be in any position in life and do whatever you want, but also exhibit that level of loyalty when the time comes. And that's kind of true. The problem for me was that I don't know anything about my faith. Yes, I grew up in a family of, alhamdulillah, I was blessed to have so many senior scholars and ulama around me. 3 or 4 maraja' in my immediate family. And so that was wonderful and it taught me a lot. But I felt like that was not enough. Our religion is dense and there is so much to it. I mean, it's literally God's final revelation, and so there's a lot to learn. So I had to educate myself. I had to be in a position where, at least as Amir al-Mu'mineen describes it, be a seeker of knowledge trying to achieve salvation. مُتَعَلِّمٌ عَلَى سَبِيلِ نَجَاةٍ. Because it's only three categories, right? عَالِمٌ رَبَّانِي, which I'm not, and probably never will be. مُتَعَلِّمٌ عَلَى سَبِيلِ نَجَاةٍ, I have hope in that department. وَهَمَجٌ رَعَاعٍ أَتْبَاعُ كُلِّ نَاعِقٍ يَمِيلُونَ مَعَ كُلِّ رِيحٍ. Then the Imam says, لِأَنَّهُمْ لَمْ يَرْكَنُوا إِلَى رُكْنٍ وَثِيقٍ. Hamaj, they're flies buzzing over the nostrils of an animal. Any wind pushes them in any number of direction, and they respond to the call of literally anyone. And so that was the first reason. And the second reason was I wanted to be effective. I wanted to be someone who's successful. And success, I defined it as being able to not only achieve salvation for yourself, which is my top priority, but also be able to reach as many people as possible and galvanize the strengths of the entire community and even the entire world. I always go to the shrines of the Ahlul Bayt, and one of the things I always ask for is, I want to be someone who makes the entire world cry for you, Ya Aba Abdullah. I want that emotional connection to happen, and I want to be instrumental. I want to play a small part in that. And so as the Bible speaks about the return of the Son of Man, I don't know if you've read or seen the verse, it says that when the Son of Man returns atop a cloud, he will come to earth and all the nations of the world will be weeping. And I kind of connect that to Ziyaratul Arba'een, and I connect that to when the 12th Imam reappears and the hadith says he will be speaking in Masjid al-Kufa, but no one can hear him. And the reason the Imam elaborates is because they're all crying. Imagine that moment, you're there standing, the Imam addressing the whole world. So that's kind of what got me into this. And I felt like, nuclear physicist? What is that? That's nothing compared to what a dedicated alim can do, right? I'll just be a state employee somewhere, or maybe a teacher at university at best. But if I can be a alim, if I can be a scholar, I can truly achieve great things. Yes, the financial prospects of becoming an alim are not very good at all. But I didn't, and I still don't care about that. I feel like I have something far more valuable. If I am able to, even on a tiny infinitesimal scale, please the Imam of my time. As the Imam himself, Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam, says to one of his companions, Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman, remember this name and remember this hadith. It's a famous story where he comes to the Imam and he cries and says, my community is so cruel and they always criticize me and attack me and whatnot. If you're someone who's actually achieving things, then you'll have people who criticize you and sometimes be very unfair to you. So he cried, imagine what he was going through. So the Imam said to him, Ya Yunus, ma yadurruka an-nas. What does it matter if everyone was against you? وَكَانَ إِمَامُكَ عَنْكَ رَاضِيًا. And your Imam was pleased with you. If I'm able to bring relief to the Imam of my time, even if it's like a tiny fraction, 1 in a billion, and that satisfaction to me was like worth the entire world. And so that got me into this. And what I did was, again, very briefly, I'm sorry I kind of went on a bit of a tangent. But I started out, I think, again, I was very much blessed to start out under the tutelage of my father, who also helped pick teachers for me in various disciplines of Islamic studies. By the way, this is right after high school. I did go to university afterwards, about 6 or 7 years after that. but I kind of regret that time, to be honest with you. I was like, I should have just continued to study in the Hawza, which I did after a stint at university. But I had the privilege again of going to a Hawza at the time, which was led by none other Ayatollah Sheikh Nimr Baqir al-Nimr, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayh, who was just an exceptional, phenomenal human being. So that's kind of how it started, and I still consider myself a very small student in the Hawza, and I also teach and whatnot, but that's, basically what I've been blessed to have. Alhamdulillah.
Sayyidina, with your role that you went into now, maybe you wouldn't have had this situation as a nuclear physicist, but now when you sit on the member and you offer lectures, naturally you will get, I think you like to call these people imbeciles or charlatans, like you like to call it in your madaris, that will come and they will bring their own opinions and bring hatred to what you say. In the same way, somebody who's be sat here and they will have a friendship group of, even if it's not within their friendship group, of varied opinions, varied differences, and people will knock on their beliefs. And in such a vulnerable situation where students are on university campus, when they may be far from home, far from parents, far from their usual community centre, give some advice or give some habits, if you will, to help strengthen their willpower when all these people are constantly spreading hatred on their beliefs and knocking them down.
So sometimes, every once in a while, I will think of an individual or a group of people or a cult and try and respond to their claims and their misconceptions. And for one reason or another, I've kind of become associated with this style of trying to respond to all these people, whereas others might take a different approach and just avoid all of that, disregard whatever's happening out there, and just say what they want to say. But we are living in very, very dangerous and precarious times, and literally every other day you have a new person who uses social media or other platforms to promote a very deviant and contradictory approach and methodology and a set of beliefs, which I think need some form of response, because it's easy for people to fall for their lies. Normally the way these people operate is just like Satan. He won't come to you with horns and hooves and fire coming out of his nostrils. They will come pretending like they are one of us, and that's always been the case and always will be. And so I feel the reason I kind of take up the challenge and sometimes put myself in difficult positions because of it. It's a very lonely place to be when you're trying to respond to all of these misconceptions all by yourself. But the reason I do that is because the community needs to be immunized, and our beliefs need to remain intact. Our practices need to be bolstered, not weakened. And so when you have people who, in the name of reform, try to kind of reinvent the wheel and change our beliefs and claim that they have somehow found the truth of Islam and of Tashayyu', and that everybody else was wrong all along, it needs someone to respond to that. However, I think it's also important that we instead of identifying those individuals and responding to their very niche and specific claims, that we give people the ability to identify the charlatans and the imposters and whatnot. Because again, this is going to be a recurring theme. It's not a one-off. It's not an anomaly. This is just the reality that we live in today. Anybody with access to a YouTube account or a TikTok account and whatnot is now subtly declaring himself the new prophet of reform and whatnot. So that's why I always say, go back to the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt. Amir al-Mu'mineen says to one of his companions by the name of Harith al-Hamdani, it's a famous tradition. Harith comes to the Imam. He was really old and frail and he needed people to help him walk. And he comes to the Imam and says to him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I'm so confused. There are too many conflicting narratives out there. And people talk about these religious matters from different vantage points and perspectives, and they're offering different interpretations. And so I don't know what's what anymore. I don't understand where to go. So the Imam gave him a key metric of ensuring that he doesn't fall for those deceptions. What does he say? He says to him, إن دين الله لا يقاس بالرجال. Verily, God's religion is not measured by opinions, by who says what, by individuals. You might have heard a variation of this hadith in a statement that the Imam made in the Battle of Jamal when someone came up to him and said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I see you here and you're the Prophet's brother, you're his cousin, you're his appointed heir and all that, and I don't have an issue with it. But then I look at the other camp and look at all these, big names that you find there. I don't know what to do. So the Imam said the same thing. Inna deen Allah la yuqasu bil-rijal. Don't say, oh, how many supporters does this view have? If it's got more supporters, then I'll follow it. Don't do that. وَإِنَّمَا بِآيَةِ الْحَقِّ. Rather, you have to have evidence. It's an evidential approach that must be employed so that you could decipher what's right from what's wrong. And so that is a disease that pretty much everyone suffers from. And if you think about it, this new economy, the fact that you have ratings now for products that you wish to purchase online, that is often a key decision maker in what you buy and what you don't buy. If you see a otherwise good looking product but has no reviews, no stars, no comments, that is very off-putting. You're likely to leave that and then go for the best sellers. That bestseller mindset is something that applies, unfortunately, not just in the products that we purchase online, but even in the ideas that we adopt. And so it needs to be ditched, it needs to be replaced by the evidentiary approach. That if this idea seems appealing, does it have any evidence to back it up? What is the evidence? I need to weigh it up. Now, the issue with all of that is it's easy to say that you need evidence and whatnot, but in reality, practically speaking, you need to be equipped with the knowledge to do this. Like for instance, if I said, what are our primary sources of hadith? Our primary sources of fiqh? Most people wouldn't have a clue what I'm talking about. Which is why we need the general public, yourselves, the youth, especially those at university. Your job is literally to study. And if alongside your academic studies you included a religious studies component under the right supervision, in the right sort of environment, if you do that, then you're able to elevate yourself. After 3 or 4 years when you graduate, you're now a much more capable religious thinker, not just someone with a degree in this field or the other. And so if you familiarize yourself with your aqa'id first and foremost, and by the way, scholars say that when it comes to aqa'id, you're not allowed to emulate someone else. When it comes to fiqh, you have no choice but to emulate, right? This whole neo-akhbari approach now that says you shouldn't follow a marja' and whatnot, it's absolutely absurd. It's ridiculous. Because either you follow a marja' or you are a qualified marja', which, let's face it, you're not. And so you have no choice but to follow the views of another person whose expertise over the course of 30, 40, 50 years allows him to extrapolate rulings from their primary sources. And that you're allowed to do. How do I pray? How do I perform Hajj? What do I do if I have a doubt between the third rak'ah and the fourth rak'ah? Those things, you can follow someone else. And you can do so with a certain degree of certainty that they've done their homework better than I ever could. And so, inshallah, Allah accepts this from me, and I won't have to face problems on the Day of Judgment. But when it comes to aqa'id, pretty much all scholars unanimously agree that you must extrapolate them from the primary sources, meaning Quran and Hadith, and to a degree, the intellect. So, how do you establish the prophethood of Rasulullah? I know we all believe it, but what's the proof for that? How do you establish the Imam of the Ahlul Bayt? How do you establish God's ineffability, for example? You need answers to those questions. And that's why I'm saying, brothers and sisters, we can't be content with just what we hear from the minbar. Because the minbar is limited, it's seasonal, it's short, and oftentimes you don't get what you need, right? You get stuff that are interesting and engaging and fun and whatnot, but do you get all of these fundamental issues? Most of the times you don't. Don't be content with the minbar. Even good lectures are not enough, let alone all the junk lectures that we now have, which are literally junk. Just like you have good, nutritious, fulfilling food, and then again you have junk food. You also have good, nutritious, spiritually nutritious lectures, but you also have junk lectures, which give you the illusion of having learned something. But in reality, if you ask yourself after the lecture, what did I actually learn? The answer is usually nothing. It was interesting, it was intoxicating, as someone described it, but did you actually improve yourself as a human being? Are you closer to the Imam of your time, having listened to an hour-long lecture and spent another hour driving to and from the center? The answer is a resounding no. So, you need to educate yourself. You need to find a way, whether it be by connecting to a scholar or starting some good, approved and qualified online Islamic studies course. Until and unless you do that, you are so prone and vulnerable to anyone coming along and making a claim and you falling for their deception. I gave one example in the lectures, that just this Fatimiyya, where this random charlatan says here, Kitab Sulaym ibn Qais, it's not authentic, subhanallah. How is it not authentic? He's like, look, this whole story about the ambush of the house of Fatimah az-Zahra, the attack on the door, the burning of the door and all that, that's nonsense. Why? He says, because the earliest source for these stories is Kitab Sulaym ibn Qais. Already, you've been entrapped. Because when you hear the earliest source is kind of dodgy, what do you think? You think, well, all the subsequent sources are useless because that's the most important one. That's like the original source of the material, which is deceptive in itself. Why? Because let's say it is the earliest source, and let us say it's compromised or not authentic or questionable, right? That doesn't mean all the subsequent sources are also questionable. Why? Because Kitab Sulaym ibn Qais is only one of the sources by which we establish the events after the death of the Holy Prophet. We have many other sources after that, including by the Imams themselves. So if Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam tells me that Fatimah az-Zahra, and I would hate to say this in the context of some university lecture, this is something that we should hear and then blood should gush out of our eyes for. But just so you understand the gravity of what I'm talking about. If Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam comes 70 years after the event and says that Fatimah az-Zahra was kicked as she lied on the ground, that is a fundamental source in itself. Kitab Sulaym ibn Qais can be whatever it is. That to me is evidence. If Shaykh al-Tusi comes along about 250 years later and says that ijma' al-Shia, the consensus of all of the scholars, the top jurists of the Shia, is that Fatimah az-Zahra was crushed between the wall and the door. and that they used the sword's sheath to beat her, that's enough. Ijma'. Every scholar of the faith believes it. Not random people like me, scholars, jurists of the highest caliber. And so, look at the deception once again. And I'm sorry I took a little too long on that question, but it is relevant. The deception here is this: it's the earliest source. Number 2, Shaykh al-Mufid says that this book is not authentic. But literally right there in the line right before Shaykh Mufid says that the chain of transmission is unreliable, he says that, but the content of Kitab Sulaym ibn Qais is largely true and authentic. So in other words, if some random guy walks in here and says that there is a graduation ceremony happening across the road, you might say, well, the chain of transmission for this news is not very strong because I don't know who that is. But I know there is an actual graduation ceremony happening because I can hear the sounds. In other words, the chain of transmission could be weak, but the content, the substance, could be very much authentic and true. So you see the deception? You see how much they twist and turn to try and make you doubt these beliefs? You would fall for these if you didn't have the tools, if you didn't put in the work and the research to understand how to address them. So, I'll finish with this. Do not measure facts against the validation of individuals. In logic, they call this what? Appeal. Anyone? No one studies philosophy and logic? Thank God. They call it appeal to authority. It's a logical fallacy. You do not appeal to authority and say, oh, such and such said it, he wears a turban, he sits on the mimbar, so he knows what he's talking about. No, that's not good enough. You need to have an evidentiary approach, especially when it comes to aqa'id. Thank you.
So it's clear that from what you said that knowledge is our weapon. So inshallah in the new year, I've written it down, we'll have a guide 101. I will get the topic, if you don't mind, checked by you, and our teacher checked by you. And inshallah together we can build that knowledge in order for us to stand strong in our beliefs, because without it, these charlatans will get us. So inshallah we'll do that. So a really quick question, this one. 3 habits for us students that we can easily do with our student life, even though I don't see how everyone says student life is super busy, but if they have a really demanding degree, 3 simple habits that can help us inshallah through this time.
Off the top of my head, number 1, find a way to connect to the Imam of the time. This is a very critical spiritual component that we cannot lose sight of, and it can't be reduced down to reading Dua al-Faraj after prayers or after lectures. There has to be a personal, visceral connection to the Imam of my time. And there are prescriptions for that. There are traditions that say read this dua, for example, Dua al-Ahd every morning, Dua al-Nudba on Fridays. I was so pleased and felt incredibly proud years ago when I learned that in some of the universities in London, they were holding Dua al-Nudba sessions on Fridays, which is incredible. That our youth in this day and age, with all of the confusion and all of the busy lives and whatnot, are actually gathering around on university campuses to recite Dua al-Nudba, which takes about half an hour every Friday. But it's such an incredible way to connect to the Imam. And really, Dua al-Nudba, for those of you who've contemplated over the contents of the dua, it's a summary of our entire faith. It's literally a reminder of prophethood, imamah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and then finally Imam al-Zaman. And it makes it so palpable, it makes it so real that you can't help but leave the session not feeling somehow connected to the Imam. So connect to Imam al-Zaman, number 1. Number 2, I think it's critical that we organize, and so the fact that we have an APSOC at university campuses is wonderful. the followers of the Ahlul Bayt need to find a way to sort of mingle and synergize and think about our issues and provide solutions collectively. And I would highly encourage you to take part in the programs and the initiatives that you have, and just create networks. You know, if you want to find a good job, networking is key, right? That's why LinkedIn is such a big thing. If you want to find a job within the organization of Imam al-Zaman, you also need to network. You need to find like-minded individuals, not only to give you that, you know, emotional nourishment that you need in this day and age when we feel so lonely and so abandoned, right? Having a brother or sister or someone who can give you that backing and that support is absolutely critical, but also to synergize our initiatives and our work and talk about these issues. And number three, I would say it's critical that, as I said earlier, to try and find a way to improve my knowledge of the faith, even if it's like in very small incremental steps. The hadith famously says, قَلِيلٌ دَائِمٌ خَيْرٌ مِنْ كَثِيرٍ مُنْقَطِعٍ. A thing that is tiny but continuous is much better than something that's big but doesn't have traction, right? If you have a Muharram program, that is absolutely critical. But usually that's a seasonal thing. It's 10 days a year and that's it. Most people just go back. Lebanese people call the day of Ashura Falleh. And Falleh means to escape, to run, right? It's the end. And that's why a lot of people just go back and revert to their old ways of just doing every sin under the sun right after Ashura. What's needed is for a consistent program that goes on throughout the year. And one suggestion for that is a book club, right? I think we talked about this the other day, or perhaps with some of the brothers from Liverpool. A book club allows you to sort of, you know, have a text that you're kind of reading through and progressing, but at the same time, it's kind of interactive and communal and very beneficial if you find the right book, right? And there are many, many good books that I could recommend. In fact, I was thinking about doing a list of 10 books for people who want to have book clubs at university campuses and whatnot, which I'll share, inshallah. Thank you.
So now we've got a guide 101 that will implement Sayyid, and we've got Dua on Friday. We have Dua on Thursday, every other Thursday. So maybe we can do one Friday, one Thursday, one Friday, one Thursday.
That'd be great.
And on that note as well, when I asked you to come today, and you kindly accepted, you mentioned that we should have a Shia chaplain. And so I have a meeting with the chaplaincy and the people that organise that before the end of the semester. Before everyone leaves, I would like, we're going to put a post out as well to say that if you could sign something, it's going to kind of form a petition or a letter.
Can you get someone to open one of the windows, maybe the one in the back, just to get some circulation happening, because it's very hot. And if you have any napkins or Kleenex, if you can get some, that'd be great.
If anyone has their own questions, if they don't have a question on the floor, I can take it from Slido.
Please.
Following on from your talk about Taqiyya, what was the difference between, like, in Muawiyah's time that allowed Imam Hassan to sign it, and then Yazid's time where Imam Hussein had to then go to fire?
That wasn't so much about taqiyya. Taqiyya is to hide your beliefs. Imam al-Hasan never hid his beliefs. I think there is a misconception that Imam al-Hasan was always, you know, the someone who kind of exhibited weakness, exalted may he be, from that impression. Whereas Imam al-Hussein was like, you know, the brave warrior that went to battle the evil of his day. Imam al-Hasan was never like that. If you look at some of the conversations Imam al-Hasan had with Muawiyah, he mopped him with the floor. Especially when Muawiyah criticized Amir al-Mu'mineen or attempted to sort of disrespect the Imam. Oh, Imam al-Hasan's bravery really shines there. And especially speaking to this tyrant, Muawiyah. So it wasn't a matter of taqiyya, but rather a matter of tactics and strategy. In the time of Muawiyah, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam had no choice but to essentially give in to the tyranny of Muawiyah, perhaps to save the Shia nation and to allow that nation or that community to continue to exist and to thrive, so that when the time for Imam al-Hussein came, Imam al-Hussein had that backing. Imam al-Hussein had over 100 people who would support him. So we don't know exactly why the Imams often make choices that are beyond our comprehension. We know for a fact that the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt receive their instructions from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and why they do certain things are beyond us. The classic example of that is Prophet Musa and Al-Abd al-Salih, who sometimes is referred to as Khidr, sometimes it's not Khidr, but anyway, regardless, I mean, here's this man who does things that are completely nonsensical, that defy logic and let alone religion, including killing a young innocent boy. And Musa's left wondering just what on earth is happening here. So if Musa is going to struggle in understanding why God does the things that he does, or why he instructs his vicegerents to do those things, then surely we're going to struggle. But it wasn't a matter of taqiyya, it was a matter of hudna, which is truce. Imam al-Hasan called for a truce, whereas, and of course, part of the reason that he did that, if you remember the terms of the ceasefire agreement or the truce, they included the fact that Muawiyah would spare all of the companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen and Imam al-Hasan. And also, and I mentioned this last night in the lecture in, where were we last night? I kind of lost track of my road trip. Birmingham, yeah. So I mentioned, for instance, that Sa'sa'a ibn Sawhan was spared by Muawiyah, who was an incredible warrior of Amir al-Mu'mineen, who's buried in Bahrain, by the way. He was spared by Muawiyah because Imam al-Hasan ensured that Muawiyah doesn't hurt him and doesn't do anything to him. And Muawiyah even says to him at one point, when he kind of insults Muawiyah, he says to him, "Oh, I wish I hadn't given Imam al-Hasan, guarantees that I would spare you." And the other reason was that Imam al-Hasan wanted to expose Muawiyah for the hypocrite that he was, which is why he said to him that you get to rule for now, but if you die, I become the Khalifa, and if I'm not around, or if I die after that, my brother Imam al-Hussein will become the Khalifa. So Muawiyah literally violated these major terms of the agreement, thus exposing himself for the hypocrite that he was. And so again, Imam al-Hasan did what he did for reasons that sometimes we understand, sometimes we don't, but with Imam al-Hussein, it was clear. The Imam said, يزيد شارب الخمور راكب الفجور قاتل النفس المحترمة ومثلي لا يبايع مثله. Someone who blatantly and openly drinks alcohol on the pulpit of Rasulullah is not someone who gets to rule, because this is a red line. This basically eviscerates the entire religion. It disembowels all of our values. And so even Muawiyah pretended that he was religious. Even Muawiyah pretended to pray. Whereas this man is just crossing every red line, and Imam al-Hussein had to do what he did. Hassan.
I have a question that, there's a lot of du'as and other types of worship that recommended, or ways to seek the Imam's guidance. But what's the most direct, ultimately direct way to, as in, ask the Imam for help about really serious but personal matter?
Good question. So basically, you need divine intervention, and you need it right now, essentially, right? One thing before I answer that question is that the hadith says, it's a hadith Qudsi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He says, "Udhkurni fi al-rakha' adhkuruka fi al-shiddah." Remember me and connect with me when you're comfortable and happy, so that when you do go through a problem, I remember you. There has to be this kind of relationship. We can't just turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we're in trouble. It just doesn't add up. And it's unfair, so to speak. So what I would suggest is this. We have a spiritual program throughout the year. And that might include things like, reading a little bit of Dua Abu Hamza every day. Just maybe a few lines. And not just delegate that or reserve it for the month of Ramadan. A little bit of Dua Jawshan here and there. Maybe take Mafatihul Janan and try and do like a page a day. If it's a dua, you read it. If it's a prayer, you perform it. That sort of thing. And if you do this consistently, then when the time comes, you don't even have to ask. You know what I mean? It's like you'll reach a level of connection and devotion toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Prophet Ibrahim describes when he's being thrown and catapulted into the fire that was created to burn him. And all these angels come to him and they say, "We're happy to offer our services. We can assist you if you want." And his response is what? "Hasbi min su'ali ilmuhu bihali." I'm content and I don't feel the need to even ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He knows what I'm going through. I don't even have to ask. Even though asking is good. It's good to pray and it's good to ask. The hadith says, "Ya Dawood utlub hatta milha ta'amika minni." Even the salt on your table, if you don't have it, ask me for it. So it's good to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Ibrahim's making a bigger point. He says that He knows what I'm going through. I am doing everything that I'm doing for His sake, so I don't have to worry. And in fact, I'll add one more point about that. There's a beautiful, incredible hadith in which Amir al-Mu'mineen says that back in the day, meaning perhaps the time of prophets and messengers and whatnot, he says back in those days, the fuqaha and hukama, meaning the top scholars and the sages of wisdom, whenever they would write to each other, they would always begin by mentioning these points. And it's a 4-point hadith. I will only mention one of it. He says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states that whoever focuses on his afterlife, meaning my biggest concern is to ensure that I survive that day. My biggest occupation is how I'm going to be on the day of judgment and my position in paradise and whatnot. If that was your biggest concern in life, as opposed to trivial daily matters and the basically the daily grind of this life, if that was your biggest concern, kafahullah amra dunyah. Man kana hammuhu akhiratuh kafahullah amra dunyah. Allah will suffice you from having to worry about these trivial daily struggles. So you focus on that, Allah looks after this. And I've seen this in the lives of ulama, for instance, in the lives of our scholars and people, not just scholars, but people who are devoted to the cause of Imam al-Zaman and whatnot. You see them really successful in their lives. Happy, content, maybe not rich, but happy. Because that's all they care about. I once got into this taxi in Mashhad in Iran. And the taxi driver was just such a lovely character. As soon as we sat down, he's like, "Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad." And we're like, "Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad." Do it, it's Thursday night. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So we sat down and I said to him, started asking basic questions to get to know him. How many kids do you have and things like that. It was an old clunker of a car. It was terrible. Somewhere along the lines so he was talking about his family. And then he said, Sayyid, I'm such a happy person. And by the way, any of you who's been to Iran knows that nobody ever talks like that. People are always complaining, always, with all due respect to Iranians. But there's like this sense of like nagging about the government and the inflation and this problem or that problem. So he's like, I am such a happy person. I'm the luckiest person alive. And I looked at his car and the fact that he's a taxi driver in Mashhad. So he said, I have a wife that I love and she loves me. And I have a son who's like the best son I could ever have. And I have this car and I have my health and I get to work. And so I don't need anything else. He was so content. I was jealous. So content. Then he said something. He's like, all I pray for is for Imam al-Zaman. That's my only prayer. I never ask for anything else. It's all about Imam al-Zaman. Then he said the other day, Iranians have a tradition, a practice, in Mashhad especially, where on the birth of Imam al-Jawad, alayhi salam, because Imam al-Rida was gifted with Imam al-Jawad later in life, and it was such a momentous event in the history of the Shia. It put to rest all of the misconceptions that were flying around about Imam al-Rida not having any descendants and there is no Imam after him, and how is it that they say it's 12 but we only have 8 and whatnot, right? So Imam al-Rida says that the greatest blessing for this religion has been the birth of my son Imam al-Jawad, alayhi salatu wassalam. So Iranians have a tradition where on the birth of Imam al-Jawad, they go and visit Imam al-Rida and they congratulate him. And it's a weird tradition, I know, but they say that we only ask hajat dunyavi. We only ask for like dunya related hajat. Because why not? So he said, my wife told me, your car is so old and just, it's about to fall apart. Go to Imam al-Rida. The birth of Imam al-Jawad was like 2 days after that. He said, she told me, go to Imam al-Rida and ask him for a new car. You don't want a bigger house, you don't want this or that, ask him for a new car. He said, I told her, you go and ask for a new car. I'll pray for Imam al-Zaman. So, the hadith says by the Imam himself, he says, أكثروا من الدعاء بتعجيل الفرج فإن ذلك فرجكم. Pray for the relief to come, meaning relief for Imam al-Zaman. And if you do so, Allah will bring you relief. Meaning that if you pray for the Imam, he will pray for you. And that, I think, is the ultimate shortcut to getting our hajat answered. Thank you. Jazakumullah.
I think there was a question from the back from the sisters.
Yes.
Would you say that what's happening in Syria is the example of, or basically what we were about the big signs of economic monetary appearance, where the society will rise?
Okay, so I think it's a sad sign of our time that there are people trying to capitalize on the situation in Syria to essentially, I believe, using that and the connections drawn to the end of days and the return of the Imam for clickbait, for views and likes and so on. Personally, I believe in a number of key principles that we have to bear in mind. Number one, كَذَبَ الْوَقَّاتُونَ, which means those who draw a timeline are liars. Notice how the Imam doesn't say that they're wrong, that their calculations are inaccurate. He says they're liars, because nobody knows when that will happen. Now, obviously what you're asking about is slightly different, which is, can we say that these are parts of the series of events that could eventually lead to the return of the Imam? We could only hope. There's a beautiful hadith where the Imam says to one of his companions that there will be a time when turmoil takes over and chaos will reign supreme, and this will happen and that will happen, and it's just really, really gloomy. So he says to the Imam, Waili, woe unto me. What kind of a time, what kind of an era is that? It's an era of evil, shar, sharrun kullu. The Imam says to him, يطلب في ذلك الزمان الخير كله. That time is when you should expect the best of things. Al-Khayr, it's not a time of evil, it's a time of goodness. Why? He says, because the Imam will rise and he will clear all that out. He will fix it all up. So we hope that what's happening in Syria, what's happening in the region, is part of the kind of fluctuations and tribulations that precede the return of the Imam. But it's a mistake. In fact, it's a crime, it's a travesty to try and draw any conclusions. And in fact, anybody who says, this is what's happening in Syria, Imam al-Zaman, the latter days, I think should be dismissed. Absolutely dismissed. And the reason I say that is because this isn't the first time that we have gone through these kinds of existential challenges. If they are existential, I don't think they are. Yeah, it's a challenge, it's a problem, but it's not the first time. And I'll give you one example. As-Sayyid Ibn Tawus, Ridwanullah Ta'ala alayh, was someone who has been known to have met the Imam and heard the Imam and spoken to him and so forth. He lived in the time of the Mongol invasion of Iraq. Now imagine Iraq, which is a country that's like the center of the Shia seminaries and scholarship and whatnot, is now invaded by a bunch of savages, literal savages, who came and burnt down the libraries, they killed people, they massacred entire communities, they threw all the books in the river Tigris, they did all these things. You would be excused to think that it doesn't get any worse than this if you lived in Baghdad at the time. The entire dynasty of the Abbasids collapsed after this invasion. You'd be excused, wouldn't you? That, oh, this is it, that's it. It doesn't get any worse than this. Sayyid ibn Tawus, who was in contact with the Imam on various occasions, writes a book, which by the way would be a great addition to the book club. And that book is called Kashful Mahajjati li Thamaratil Muhjah. It's essentially his will, his wasiyah to his son. And it's not just a wasiyah, it's a beautiful book. It addresses theological questions, it addresses all manner of different issues. In that book, he says, my son, what we have witnessed is unprecedented. The challenges, the existential threats that we're going through now are next level. And we've never experienced anything like this. So I hope and pray that the return of the Imam will be in your lifetime. I'm dying, but I hope it'll be in your lifetime. That was when? 700 years ago. So we should hope and we should pray and we should above all prepare. Whether it happens in the next 10 days or 10 months or 10 years or 10,000 years, we should be ready. And that's what it all comes down to. If the Imam announces his mandate as he rests his blessed back on the Kaaba and says, Ayyuhan nas, ana al-Mahdi, am I going to be ready? And let me tell you why most of us won't be ready. Because those tests, that test is the ultimate test. It'll be the most difficult call to respond to. We might think that, when the Imam comes, I'm just going to jump on a plane. No, it'll be much more challenging than that. Much more difficult. It'll be the Imam versus the entire world. There's going to be death and destruction and bloodshed. So that'll be the most difficult test of all. Now, if I fail my test with praying my prayers, if I fail my test with my hijab, if I fail my test with respecting my parents, if I fail my test in the simplest of things, you think I'm going to pass that one? Really? Seriously? So, it all comes down to this, and I know our time is up. Prepare. Without thinking about, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Let's not be children about this. I don't mean you, of course. Let's not be like the kid who's sitting in the back seat and keeps telling his parents, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? I mean, shut up already. We will be there at some point. Just do your thing. And our thing is to prepare. And that means starting with an examination, a review of all of our actions, all of our daily habits, all of the things that could become impediments towards our response to the Imam alayhi salatu wassalam. Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sayyidina, for your time and allowing and giving us and enlightening us with your knowledge.
Thank you so much.
It's genuinely an honor to be in your presence.
Honor's all mine.
And to listen to you. And inshallah, we can take your advice and may you be blessed with all the rewards that anybody gets from taking a footstep, whether it's a close to the Imam or it's a footstep to a Guide 101 that will come next year, whether it's a footstep to our new book club that inshallah will bring.
Inshallah.
We can't thank you enough.
I will conclude with this. Thank you so much, and honor is all mine. When I say it's an honor and a privilege to be with you, I really mean it. I'm not trying to flatter you or anything, because I am so proud. Honestly, I'm proud. I'm a nobody, but then I look at the scene and I look at these faces and I look at the community. The fact that our Imam is not with us is painful. And I think any other community who lost access to its greatest source of inspiration, they would be like an army without a general. They would be in complete disarray. And again, you might point to problems here and there and say that we are in complete disarray, but we're not. We're not. The fact that we have so many, beautiful, luminous faces attending this program tonight during the season of lamentation for Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, and in her honor and in trying to understand our faith and get closer to the Imam of our time. In this time, in this age, this is beautiful, and it's a source of pride and just sheer inspiration for me. So I thank you, and obviously you will receive your rewards if you persist and remain on this path from the Imam himself. Traditions say that people in the latter days are the best of the people in comparison to all the previous generations. Those who got to live with the Holy Messenger of God and see him, those who lived through the lives of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and got to interact with the Imams. The hadith says, أهل زمان غيبته أفضل من أهل كل زمان. Those who live through the occultation of the Imam are better than all of those nations, all of those generations. Why? Part of it is that not having the Imam makes it so much more difficult. That ultimately our beliefs are based on ink on paper, as the hadith says. Right? This is where we get our beliefs from. But you know what? I have a firm conviction. And whether it's a hadith that's written in a book, or whether it's something that I've deduced from our ulama and whatnot, I hold firmly to that. I mentioned this hadith just last night. Zayd ibn Sawhan, not Sa'sa'a, the one I mentioned, but Zayd, when he falls to the ground in the battle of Jamal, Amir al-Mu'mineen comes to him. And he says to him, may Allah bless you, O Zayd. You were such a big help, you were a great supporter, and you were someone I didn't have to worry too much about. كنت قليل المؤونة كثير المعونة. Which is how we should be towards our Imam. The Imam shouldn't have to worry about me, I should worry about him. So he says that to Zayd ibn Sawhan. Zayd responds by saying, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, you know why I joined you? And he's bleeding to death. He said, I joined you based on a hadith, one hadith, that was narrated to me by a woman. Obviously, the woman was Salama, the wife of Rasulullah, but still, most people would dismiss it. Some woman said something. And it's the hadith where Salama told me that Rasulullah said, من كنت مولاه فعلي مولاه. اللهم والي من والاه وعادي من عاداه وانصر من نصره واخذل من خذله. That's more than enough for me. Our entire belief system is based on that. But you know what? The fact that you have the conviction to hold on to it and be the people that you are tonight is incredibly, a source of incredible pride, and may Allah bless you for it.